And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Well, nothing ordinary about the Eagles being back in the Super Bowl. I mean, some people thought this could happen, and it did happen. We talked a lot about it. Right now, Andrew DiCecco is the Eagles back at practice today. And Andrew, this has been kind of a roller coaster season coming off of last year where obviously it did not go the way they did. I want to kind of get your thoughts. As you've been around this team, you were around them last year, all season long. Here we are on Thursday, 10 days away from them going to the Super Bowl. I want to get your initial thought at what is different and feels different about this team as to why the things that happened last year never really reared their ugly head into this year's team.
Yeah, it's just it comes down to culture. It comes down to Nick Sirianni setting the tone, learning from last year, getting a different group of men in the locker room. Obviously, there's a lot of holdovers, but there's also a lot of younger players, a lot of free agents that weren't versed in what happened last year. And so you really, if you're the Eagles, you were able to turn the page because a lot of the players weren't the same. It wasn't the same makeup. So I just believe that there was a culmination of that and also the leadership from Nick Sirianni and really strong locker room pillars like Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson that really set the tone and got it back to the way that it was back in 22. But I would even argue that the chemistry is even better than it was in 22. I haven't seen a team this close since I've been covering them.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, is there a moment this year that you've been around this team all the way, going back to last year, but now through this year training camp, and, they had that game against Jacksonville. They're 2-2 at the break. Was there a time for you where you kind of felt that, no, this season's not going to go awry, that 2-2 start was more of just a feeling out period? Or was there any concern from you at 2-2 about, hey, I don't know that this team has the makeup to go to a Super Bowl?
No concern for me ever. Just being around the team, you knew that they were wired a little bit differently. And I think if I had to put my finger on a moment in the season that I viewed to be the turning point, it would have been the Giants game, the first Giants game, when they're coming off that Cleveland Browns game where a lot of the talk in the early part of that week leading into the game was about the antics that Nick Sirianni had after the game, going with fans and the post-game press conference. And it just seemed like that would be a moment, if ever were a moment, that would deter the team from their mission and maybe.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second, Andrew. We're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. And, it's interesting because he brings up that first Giant game. Interestingly enough, if you remember, the Eagles won that Super Bowl in 2017, and it was a Giant game. That was really the difference in that one, right? That was the Jake Elliott 61-yard field goal game. So, Andrew, you just were mentioning it was that Giant game that you thought that kind of turned. And ironically, in 2017, it was that Giant game when Elliott kicked that field goal. So the Giants seem to be a theme here, and we know the theme with the Giants and Saquon Barkley and just how special he has been. But, how much has this team really kind of needed Barkley, or is it more of like, hey, we've got this unbelievable weapon, we're just going to use Barkley? Because they do have all these other weapons, and I still feel that this is, you hear so much about Barkley and this team and the run game, and in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, but they have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Is it just so much that Barkley has been that good that they, turn to him, or is it that they've needed to turn to him?
No, they needed him. Make no mistake about it. They needed him because the offense for much of the season wasn't looking the way it was supposed to, what many envisioned going into the season in terms of the passing game. It was very choppy and sporadic. And a lot of times when the offense was stalling, it was because they were trying to become pass happy and they got away from what was making them so successful, which was running the football, imposing their will at the line of scrimmage and getting Saquon Barkley and the offense rolling. So it was a perfect marriage. They're getting a player who fit their system extremely well. He sort of reinvigorated his career, and he's now on the winning side of things. And the offensive line really got to flex their muscle a little bit by moving forward and really wearing down teams. And I just think that was the successful recipe, and you saw the results.
Well, let's start with that then, the offensive line. I know we're early in their teams, getting ready. Their first practice yesterday, they had kind of a walkthrough. But how will that offensive line, in your mind, look? Will they all be intact, ready to go on Super Bowl Sunday. Juergens obviously had to finish the game. Landon Dickerson started the game. He could not finish it. So let's start with the line in your mind. Will they have all 5 guys Super Bowl Sunday?
I mean, you're asking me 10 days out. I would say yes, because there's time, and the Eagles do a really good job of managing injuries. They managed just different players, even if they're not injured, just trying to give them rest midweek to ensure that they're fresh, and getting them to Sunday is always the objective. So I would say yeah right now, but I will also say that whenever you have a back injury like Cam Juergens has, you never know. It can flare up at any time. Whenever you're dealing with a knee injury, depending on the severity, it can flare up. But I will say that Landon Dickerson is somebody who's come in and out of games before. He's gone back in. There's been times during the season where you're like, there's no way he's coming back from that. And he does. He's tough as nails, and I think that it would have to take an awful lot for either player to miss the Super Bowl.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit more about that, too, because, hey, they have Dickerson, who hasn't played center since college, really. He slides over to play center. He goes through a half. Then Juergens pops in. But people don't remember, Tyler Steen had to go play left guard. I don't know how much left guard Steen has had to play this whole season, but it's almost like the year in 2017 where they just popped somebody else in, and you didn't even notice that there was somebody else playing that position.
Yeah, and a lot of the players that I've talked to throughout the season, Mike, will also say we prepare as if we're starters. And when I say players, that they're obviously non-starters. So when their number is called, you don't have to flip that switch. They're ready to go. They're programmed to go because that's how they prepare throughout the week. For the offensive line, that's the message that's shared and really instilled in their DNA from offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland. That's what Tyler Steen has told me multiple times this season, that he always says prepare as if you're the starter so that you're ready to go. And you see that across the board. Isaiah Rodgers, Grant Calcaterra, Fred Johnson. Look across the defensive side, Oren Burks. I just think that the Eagles have done a really good job of preparing guys to be ready to go.
Yeah, the Burks one is another big one there. You know, you mentioned Oren Burks stepping in. Ironically, they needed a linebacker in 2017 to step in there. And there's a lot of parallels that are eerily. You mentioned the Giant game. That was a game in 2017 that they needed. Obviously, Jason Peters was hurt that year. They needed Big V stepping in at left tackle. Hopefully, they don't need someone to step in the line. But the next man up mentality has kind of been a big thing, and it goes to the depth of this team. But I want to get your thoughts on, we know, Andrew, you know, this time last year, we're thinking about the draft. They have hit the ball out of the park and some in the draft, but how the draft has really reshaped this team from the one that we saw just 2 years ago against the Chiefs when we were in Phoenix. You and I were in Phoenix having a pizza talking about this Eagles team, how different that team is from this one.
Yeah, it's a lot different. And Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean are obviously going to change the back-end complexion there in terms of just youth and athleticism and speed and range. Then, of course, drafting someone like Nakobe Dean. Now, he won't be there playing in Super Bowl 59, of course, but I thought that he was a big key to this defense this year. Nolan Smith, just not only drafting right, but you can draft, you know, all the players that you want, but if you don't develop those players, it doesn't much matter who you bring in. So I think that it's been a collective effort between the player making that stride and Howie Roseman being aggressive at getting the players that he believes fits the defensive system. And yeah, I just think it's been a great story of player development and draft assessment. And now you're seeing a lot of those players playing pivotal roles for a Super Bowl team.
All right. Give me your thoughts on the growth of Nolan Smith, where he was when you saw him in camp and where he is now in your mind.
Yeah, I think Nolan Smith's a player that a lot of folks were quick to write off, and you know, I thought that was really hasty and foolish. But you know, sometimes a player takes a bit longer to develop, and in the case of Nolan, he had to get stronger. He had another year with that same position coach in Jeremiah Washburn, and he had to, you know, learn how to use his hands better, become a little bit more physical at the point of attack. Just the natural growth and evolution of a player, which is why I've always been of the mindset that whenever I see somebody on social media and they write something that the Eagles whiffed, this player can't play, they reached on that guy, well, how can you make that determination without giving it a couple of years to really manifest and let the player really grow into his body and absorb an NFL playbook? A lot of players, they progress at different rates, and I think Nolan Smith's a prime example of that.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right. I think people kind of were writing him off as, He might be at best a rotational type of player, but man, they have needed him big time. We saw Jordan Davis get a sack in the playoff game last week. I mean, these Georgia Bulldogs that people were like, these Bulldogs might not have. Man, they have really changed the complexity of the pass rush and all that stuff. Real quick, we're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4. Before we let you go, I know the Eagles' practice schedule has some time changes here, so Andrew's going to be a little shorter than normal. Do you anticipate Brandon Graham playing on Super Bowl Sunday?
Again, 10 days out, it's too early to say. I know that they opened up his practice window. Him playing the position that he plays where you have to push off, you have to shed blockers. Of course, you have to extend your arms. Tricep injuries are very finicky in that way. And we'll have to wait and see how it progresses. I know that if you ask Brandon, he's going to want to give it a go. Probably the last game he's ever going to play, and I think he's going to give everything that he can to show this week that he's ready to go. And I think that would be a strong boost for team morale if he's able to go and have him run through that tunnel, because I was standing right there when he tore his tricep, and he said it to us in L.A., and it's been a long road, but he's been around the team. He's been positive. He's been putting in the work behind the scenes to make sure that he's ready for this moment. So we'll have to wait and see how that all transpires.
Well, and are you surprised at the pass rush? I mean, we really thought, man, losing Brandon Graham, setting the edge. There's a guy, JalenHurts Hunt is a guy that you talked about all the way back in August at training camp. He's kind of come in and kind of filled that rotational role a little bit, but we really felt that Graham's absence was going to be felt. But quite frankly, Andrew, nothing against Brandon Graham. I don't know that you even realize that he's been gone.
No, he's a good run defender and everything like that, and he was having his best game against the Rams, and he's extremely pivotal for just the locker room. And he's been around, but the Eagles have been able to get by. Crazy enough, they've been able to get by with a three-man rotation, so I think that also speaks to the development of JalenHurts Hunt. But if they're able to get somebody like Brandon Graham back, who obviously is the heartbeat in many ways of that locker room, he's a locker room pillar, and he brings the juice, he brings the energy. I think that kind of stuff radiates throughout the locker room and will certainly give that team even more of a boost going into Super Bowl 59.
All right, buddy. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you out there, man. I haven't seen you in a while. We'll be seeing you in New Orleans, and, of course, the Eagles getting ready to go to New Orleans to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll have some live coverage from Andrew and Jeff and Adam for Football at 4 all week long on Radio Row starting Wednesday next week. And, Andrew, I look forward to seeing you again, my friend.
Yeah, man, I'll be out there.
All right, buddy. Andrew DiCecco, everybody. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.